Namaste. First of all, a big thank you to Sangam Talks for this opportunity to showcase my birthplace, Odisha, and to speak about a lot of not so well known glories of her and its enigmatic heritage and legacies, as my presentation says. A big thank you and a welcome to all the viewers today. Before I begin this talk, I would like to say that this is more of a This has been a personal journey for me as well. In the last few years, I have tried learning more about my heritage, my roots, and as I went on this journey, there were lots of moments of serendipity which led me to find very astonishing and significantly surprising facts that hardly anyone knows in Odisha even now. So, this presentation today is more of a succinct compilation of most of my journey of this last few years. And before we go into the journey, as the name suggests here, the heritage, legacies, culture, when we speak to people like what does heritage mean, what does culture mean to them, we usually find a lot of similar answers. Like culture is something that we follow in our everyday life, the rituals, traditions that we follow, the food that we eat, the types of clothes that we wear. And heritage is something that is a passing on of that culture from generation to generation. Now, this little infographic here I created is about my way of understanding how heritage, how culture is not a very static thing. It has always been fluid through the times, through the millennia, through the geographical boundaries, through the oceans. Culture has managed to spread across the globe, and because of people in coming to a certain place for trade or for other pursuits, for people going out of their own homeland to other places and taking their culture with them. So this has been always a very two-way interaction and a fluid passing on of culture and heritage throughout the times. And as Mark Twain very famously said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Because times will change, it will never be a repeated history. But of course, the things will rhyme with each other. Similar things happen, similar so now when we say, oh, our food is similar to yours, or oh, this ritual we follow, you also follow. So these are those rhyming things that we find, even events too. So with this, let's start our talk. And first, I would like to show about Odisha. Where is Odisha? We get a lot of questions even now in this time, in this age, when we meet people and they ask, "Where are you from in India?" And we say, "We are from Odisha." They will say, "Okay, where is Odisha?" So my first slide is, where is Odisha? Its location right now in India. Odisha is in the southeastern part of India, and it's a coastal state. And this is a bigger map of it. The state form of Odisha was given to it in 1936 on the 1st of April, after having been kept fragmented and segmented and even merged with its neighboring regions for more than 300 years. So this present form was gotten in 1936. But centuries ago, that was not just the geographical boundary of what Odias or people from Odisha have identified themselves as. People from Odisha have identified themselves as from the region of Kalinga. Kalinga has been a place that has been steeped in antiquity and history and a lot of culture. From this quote here, it's from researcher called F.B. Eldridge. As it says, on the east coast of India, stretching from the mouth of the Ganges to the Krishna, was the ancient kingdom of Kalinga, founded as far back as the 8th century before Common Era, and where, according to the inscriptions found, navigation and maritime commerce formed part of the education of its princes. The paper goes on saying about a lot of other things too, but here I've just tried to show you the geographical extent of the Kalinga region, not as a kingdom, but as a region which was inhabited by various types of people. They spoke different languages, they had different occupations, they followed different faiths and beliefs, but they all identified themselves as belonging to Kalinga. And even the Mahabharata, there are a couple of verses in Mahabharata which describes about the geographical extent of Kalinga. Ancient Jaina texts talk about Kalinga's antiquity going as far back as 9th century before Common Era. That is 2900 years and still counting. So Kalinga as a region, Odisha as a region, is really steeped in antiquity, and that's why you can imagine how much culture, heritage, and lots of stories it holds, and we need to unravel that. First, Kalinga, what's in a name? So, just the name also holds a lot of key answers to the entire thing. Kalinga, Kaling, Kalinga, Kainga, Kalingam, Keling, Kling. These are all mentions of Kalinga, not just as a geographical region in India, but also in other regions across the Indian Ocean periphery. Let's examine some of it in the context of past times as well as in the context of today. So, in the past, the name Kalinga, let's see a couple of examples. Ancient Burma, as far back as 7th century before Common Era, ancient Burma went by the name Kalingarata, that is Kalingarashtra. The bay on the eastern side of the Indian landmass, which now is known as the Indian Bay of Bengal, it used to be known as Kalingodra, and the islands in the bay as Kalingadreshu. This is mentioned in the ancient Buddhist text of Arya Manjushri Mulakalpa. Then in the 6th, 7th century after Common Era, like CE, AD, Central Java had a Hindu Buddhist kingdom called Kalinga. So in the past, Kalinga name we can find in other regions. Now in the present day, in the island group of Philippines, there is still a province which is named as Kalinga. And this Kalinga province is inhabited by an indigenous tribe who were called as the Kalinga tribes, and they belong to the Kalinga culture. They are in fact world famous for their Kalinga tattoos. In the present times, many of the Polynesian islands, Polynesian islands are a group of islands in the Pacific, and in many of these islands, there are different languages which are spoken. Out of that, in Maori, in Tongan, in one of the Samoan languages, the word Kainga means village. So this is an illustration of a Maori Kainga. Now we saw about the word Kalinga, Kainga in the past and present times, referring to geographies. Let's talk about the name Kalinga in terms of the present and past times as related to textiles. How in today's time we know textiles as Banarsi, Kanjivaram, or Sambalpuri, like that. In the past, one of the most exquisite weaves which was available or coveted was the Kalinga textiles. So much so that in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta of the ancient Buddhist canonical Pali text of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, it is mentioned that after Gautam Buddha's Mahaparinirvana, these lines are the English translation. They also strew sand all over the ground, spreading Kalinga and Kambala cloths and silken cloths on it. So you can imagine the exquisiteness and the importance of this cloth that they used it for the Gautam Buddha's Mahaparinibbana. Then the word Kalingam is an ancient Tamil word used in the 1st century CE and later for just the word for weaves and textiles. These are exquisite weaves and textiles were called as Kalingam because the textiles and weaves from the Nagas of the Kalinga country were one of the most prized imports by the Pandyans, who exported it for trade with the ancient Romans. And most of the Pandyan riches came because of these Kalingam textiles. So much so that the entire weave and textiles were called as just Kalingam. Then the words kelling and kling. Even in today's time, these words can be found in Malay and some parts of Indonesia when they refer it to anything Indian. In the olden times, the word kelling was derived from the name of the kingdom of Kalinga, and they used to denote people of India as well as the textiles of India as kelling or kling. And even today, that was in the past, but even today, one of the textiles in Bali, it's an archaic textile weave called as kelling. It is still woven in Nusa Penida in Bali. Now, let me take you to the different time periods and different eras where Odisha has been named in different ways. So there are attributed names and perceived names of Odisha. The first set, let me show you these names: Ukkala, Kelling, Odiana, Dosarin, Gangaride, Kealing, Odisha. All these names have been recorded in others' histories, like people from outside of India, when they have talked about Odisha, these are the names they have mentioned while talking about Odisha. And these are the names like Kalinga, Utkala, Kungada, Udradesa. All these names have been described about Odisha when our own scholars have written something about Odisha. So, to describe parts of Kalinga or like different parts of Kalinga during Odisha during different time periods, all these names have been given. So, these are all recorded names in texts and epigraphic evidences and a lot of other things. So, what does all this signify? Why so many names? So, first, what I perceive, like if there are so many names attributed from foreign scholars or travelers, that means this area of Indian subcontinent has always been a significant place for people from other parts of the world. If it were just an obscure or unimportant place, they would not have written about Odisha's, things so many times and in such brilliant, such awe and in beautiful words. So it must have meant something to them. That's why every time in different time periods from different people, we know all these different names mentioned. And what does names from our own scholars signify? That means this area, this region has been home to a variety of clans and people who have followed different faiths, but all of them together have given to the vibrancy and the rich heritage and culture of what Odisha is today. So, out of some of the significant mentions about Odisha, these are some of the names that you all might recognize. I have just picked a few out of so many other mentions. So, from our own scholars, Chanakya has mentioned, Kalidasa has mentioned, and from Odhayana, Panini, there are mentions about Odisha from all these people. From outsiders, Megasthenes, Ptolemy, Fahian, I Ching, Huinsang, Tommy Perez, so many people have mentioned. Out of so many, I have just cherry picked three of the mentions about Odisha because these three show different aspects about Odisha, what they wanted to record in their records. The first one I cherry picked is from Diodorus. He was a Greek historian from 1st century before Christ, before Common Era. And in his writings, he says about the mighty elephants of Kalinga being the best, owing to which their country has never been conquered by any foreign king. For all other nations dread the overwhelming number and strength of these animals. The second one I have picked is about the diamond and gemstones that were exported from Odisha region to ancient Rome. Ptolemy has mentioned about Rome importing diamonds from the Sambalpur region of Odisha. Of course, the name Sambalpur was known differently in Ptolemy's times, but that is modern day Sambalpur. And that has been corroborated by an eminent British historian, Edward Gibbon, in one of his books about the fall and decline of Roman Empire. The third mention I have cherry picked is from more recent times. It's from the 14th, 15th century CE. This is because I wanted to show you here about mentions from a long time ago as well as more recent till 14th 15th century CE also. And this is from a person who is not a scholar or a monk or trader. He's just a traveler. Wang Dayun, he was a traveler from China who traveled to a lot of places in the Indian Ocean. And when he came to Odisha, what he has recorded is this. He has said that the people are as honest as the Buddha, and they are more prosperous than in any other foreign land. So till 15th century, like just 600 years ago, Odisha was still known to be one of the most prosperous as well as a reliable place to come to. Now, out of all this prosperity that lured or attracted all these different people to Odisha, let's see what were the reasons and the reasonings behind it. The first of all, for Odisha's significant success was its location and topography. If you remember from the map that I had shown you, one side of Odisha is bordered by a long coastline of the bay. Inside Odisha is a place, the topography is like more like in the hinterlands, it is mountainous, the Eastern Ghats run, and there are lots of deep rivers running and lots of riverine channels. And the place is deeply, there are lots of forests. There used to be more forests earlier, which were inhabited by wild beasts. So such difficult terrains was very conducive for the people who lived there, because they managed to know how to work with this terrain and work with whatever was offered to them. But it was difficult for outsiders to come and fathom the inscrutability of this place. So the elephants, the wild beasts, the rivers, the mountains, and the one side coastline was like a natural barrier for this land. And with so many waterways and the coast, the people developed their sea legs, even I think before they could run or walk. They were like water babies. So navigation and maritime exploration started quite early in Odisha's history. So location and topography is one of the reason why Odisha was so secluded, isolated, and untouched by outside influences for a long, long time. Second is the natural resources and commodities. Odisha has always been home to a lot of minerals, gemstones, forest produces, even people's skills using like the commodities like textiles and other things. So some of the most prized possessions that people imported from Odisha, like Egyptians, Romans, Greeks, Southeast Asian nations, Arabians, were like pearls, diamonds, gemstones, textiles, frankincense, beeswax, kingfisher feathers, and a lot many more things. Third one, very, very important, with the elephants of Odisha. As we saw in one of the previous slides, how Diodorus has written about the elephant. Similarly, Chanakya has talked about the elephant strength of Odisha. Huan Sang has talked, Ibn Khordadbeh has talked. Everyone has gushed about the mighty elephants of Odisha, which were known the world over. So the tusk, the ivory of the elephant, was called dosarin by the Romans and Greeks, and that's why this region they called as the Dosarina, because the finest ivory came from this land. Not just the ivory, the elephants themselves were export commodities and were exported via maritime navigation via big ships. So elephants were another commodity which was very important for Odisha's glory. And the fourth, the last but not the least, the people who inhabited this region. The people were a motley crew, you could say. There were like lots of different occupations, lots of different clans, indigenous tribes, and there were like they followed different faiths. There were so many different type of people were very hardworking, enterprising, skilled, and these people were the key to for Odisha's success and its popularity and its name and fame the world over, especially all across the Indian Ocean realm. So, who were these people? The group of people who made Odisha successful were a particular clan of traders and merchants called as the Kalinga Sadhavas. Sadhavas were the trader and merchant clan. They didn't belong to just any one clan. They were not just Hindu Sadhavas. They were like Jaina Sadhavas or Buddha Sadhavas, indigenous. There were Sadhavas from every sort of language they spoke, different occupations. But if you consider it in today's context, other big shipping magnates or CEOs like that, Sadhabas, they had position, or they managed a lot of fleet of ships, which in which they employed a different type of skilled workers. Like there were experts in navigation, and experts in shipbuilding. Some were experts in the ocean currents and other oceanic activities. And how in today's shipping there are lots of different type of occupations who are employed. Just like that, the Sadhavas were enterprising folks who managed to do all this, and they were the incomparable master of the high seas, and they were brilliant stevedores of commodities as well as culture in the Indian Ocean region. I say commodities and culture because just trading goods was not the legacy what we see today, but with them, the culture also spread to a lot of other parts of the world, and they also brought in maybe cultures from other parts of the world to Orissa. So they were like enterprising, brave, swashbuckler, seafaring sailors. They were one really significant group of people for Odisha, and still we remember them in one of our big festivals that I'll talk about a little later. And what contributed to the expertise, acumen, and efficiency of the Sadhavas or the Sadhava ships? They had variety of ships to their courtiers. So there were large ships, there were small ships, there were riverine ships, there were ships for ocean voyages, there were passenger ships, and there were cargo ships. So just like how it is in today's world, it was just like that centuries ago with the Kalinga Sadhava ships. So much so that Raja Bhoja of the eminent Raja Bhoja in his work Yukti Kalpataru, he talks about the types of Kalinga ships of as Samanya and Vishesha, like a normal one and a special one for oceanic voyages. Brahmanda Purana, the the very famous Brahmanda Purana, talks about Chilika being the gateway for all these voyages, where thousands of sailors were maneuvering different ships. Like hundreds of ships were moved at the same time, and thousands of sailors in ships going from Chilika to different parts of the world. The Sadhavas had in depth knowledge of monsoon winds. They had an expertise on the weather phenomena, ocean currents, oceanic flora and fauna, topographies, the stars and night sky. They used advanced navigational tools, like, for example, the Matsya Yantra, and a very unique type of thing called as Disha Kaka, the land finding birds. Just how in today's world we use GPS, the Sadhavas use the Disha Kaka or the land finding birds. And this was not just used by Sadhavas, but even in Indus Saraswati civilization, we see seals from Mohenjo-daro where Disha Kaka were there. So this was more of a knowledge in maritime, which the Sadhavas also possessed and they used. This is a illustration of different types of boitas, and the Sadhavas had extensive networks and trade routes for maritime navigation all across the Indian Ocean. This particular frieze is from the temple at Borobudur in Java, which shows the seafarers from Kalinga going and colonizing Java. Now, Kalinga's maritime strength and the enduring legacies of it. This was the reason for Odisha's sovereignty, economic prosperity, overseas respect, and Odisha's popularity. So, Odisha, Kalinga, and her maritime heritage, like they are all closely intertwined. This is a filigree Sadhava Boita exhibit from the Kalabhumi Museum in Bhubaneswar. Now we talked about Sadhavas, the maritime power of Odisha, the reach, the popularity of Odisha's commodities all across the globe. But here I would like to emphasize on something about the soft power of Kalinga. Today we know soft power, how India exerts a soft power all across the world. For example, with yoga, but in context of Kalinga, the silent strength of Kalinga and its soft power, it can be comparable to any other prominent thalassocracy around the world. Like, we know about Vikings, we know about Greeks or other maritime powers from different time periods, but hardly anyone has any knowledge about the Kalinga Sadhavas or the Kalinga maritime power. Although they were not invaders or conquerors or attackers and takers of land and people, but their reach was more holistic, more organic and enduring, because it was more of a socio-cultural presence of theirs, because they went for trade. They also developed, settled colonies there. People lived there. There were exchange of ideas, like they took scholars, then sculptors, artists, artisans with them, and also brought back other things from the places they visited. So it was more of a holistic way of disseminating the culture across these regions. Just how even now it works, like diaspora, Indian diaspora, they live in different parts of the world, but they carry, like us, we carry the culture to different parts of the world and integrate it there. And these echoes and imprints of the Sadhava's presence can be felt even now. How it is the different signs and the little these imprints we will discuss a little later. What are these remnants of the legacies that the Sadhavas have left everywhere? So, with this, let's see the reach of Kalinga. Where was Kalinga's reach? I have spoken about Kalinga people's reach all over the Indian Ocean rim. It was not just towards the Southeast Asian region of the, like, let's say, today's Cambodia, Vietnam, Burma, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and all, but also towards the Arabian seaside of, like, the Roman Empire, Egyptian Empire, Greek Empire, Persia and Arabia. So the maritime trade and socio-cultural presence of Kalinga was all across the Indian Ocean realm. And this can be found in both tangible as well as intangible evidences. And the following slides that I'm going to show you are records in other people's accounts and historical records. It's not records from our own history, but I have cherry picked only the accounts from what we see in others' histories. The first case study is Myanmar, today's Myanmar, which was ancient Burma. So, in the ancient Burmese text of Buddhaghat, it talks about steady commercial interaction with Burma by the Buddhist merchants of Kalinga. Now, Trapassu and Bhallika, their story is still well known in Burma. Who were Trapassu and Bhallika? They were two merchant brothers who came from Utkala. Utkala, many of you might know that is another word for Odisha. And Trapassu and Bhallika were the merchant brothers from Utkala. If you see the sculpture here that I have shown, a fasting Buddha sculpture, which is right now in Pakistan's Peshawar area, is from the 2nd century, 3rd century times. The base of this sculpture, the story of Trapassu Bhallika is sculpted here. Now, what happened was Trapassu and Bhallika, during their journey with their caravan, they were merchants, so they were like heading a caravan of commodities and people through the Uruvela forest when they met Buddha. The Buddha had just found his enlightenment, and during this time, Trapassu and Bhallika met him, and they fed the Buddha with honey and rice cakes that we know in Odisha now as Arisa Pitha. So the Buddha was so pleased with them, And Trapassu and Bhalika became the first lay disciples of the Buddha, the common people who were disciples of the Buddha. With this, the Buddha had gifted Trapassu and Bhalika with 8 strands of hairs from his head as a goodwill gesture to them. And with these hairs from the Buddha's head, which is called Kesa Asthi, this Kesha Asthi the brothers carried with them to their homeland Utkala. And during the course of their trade from Utkala's port of Tamralipti, when they went to Burma, they presented some of the hairs to the then Burmese King Okalapa, and he enshrined it in a pagoda temple because Kesha Asthi or any Asthi of Buddha were considered to be the highest regarded things in for Buddhists. So that Kesha Asthi is still enshrined in the Shwedagon Pagoda in Yangon. So in Rangoon, this pagoda still enshrines the Buddha's Kesha Asthi that was carried by Trapassu and Bhalika. Also, Trapassu and Bhalika's right his we find epigraphical evidences in one of Odisha's regions where they had donated something, the asthi, and the then viharas and stupas that were created had contained that asthi. Even they had been to Sinhala, and in Sinhalese legends we find mention of Trapassu and Bhalika. Second is the kingdom of Sri Khetra in Burma. It was a place called Sri Khetra, which is even present today. And Sri Khetra in Odisha's context, the Puri Jagannath Dham is called as the Sri Khetra even now. And Burma had a place called Sri Khetra, which is in today's time, it's a World Heritage Site. And during 11th century, there was a king called Kanasiddha in Burma who commissioned a temple called Ananda Temple that was to be built in Bagan. He had great relations with Kalinga, and he had heard about the temple of Ananta at Khandagiri Hills, and he was so inspired, he built the Bagan temple of Ananda Temple in Bagan, based on Ananta Temple of Khandagiri in Bhubaneswar. Then the second case study is Sinhala, that is present day Sri Lanka. In Sri Lankan legends, they speak about Prince Vijaya, who went to Sri Lanka from India and established the kingdom of Sinhala there. Now, these legends that I have been speaking from Burma or Sinhala, all these have been forgotten in Odisha, but these are legends that are recorded in their histories. So Vijay's story is a still popular story, made into movies, into books, in their theater, in the legends, about how a grandson of a Kalinga princess and a Vanga prince, he went to Ceylon, like Sri Lanka, and established Sinhala, which he named after his father, whose name was Singhabahu. It's a big story. Maybe whoever is interested, you could like find out more. That is, but today's talk it would become a little more. So I'm just stopping there with Vijay's story. The second very, very important story in term of Sri Lanka's history is that of Princess Hemamala of Kalinga. Hemamala or Hemamali, as they call her in Sinhala, was a princess of Kalinga who, with her husband Prince Danta, carried the sacred tooth relic of the Buddha in her long traces of her hair, and she fled to Sri Lanka because her father had entrusted her with the tooth relic that was previously worshipped at Puri, at Dantapuri, in a temple for the tooth relic. So, before talking about Hemamala, let me tell you about the tooth relic. The tooth relic of the Buddha was a left canine tooth, which was given by a monk Khema, who was the Buddha's disciple after his Mahaparinibbana. So, this tooth was entrusted by Khema to the king Brahmadatta, who built pagoda temple for the tooth at Dantapuri, that is Puri today. So here for centuries, this tooth relic of the Buddha was worshipped. But after centuries, there was an imminent attack. What was supposed to happen? So to evade that attack, the then ruling king called Guhasiva of Kalinga, he entrusted his daughter Hemamala and his son-in-law Danta with this sacred tooth relic to take it away safely to Singhala, because Singhala was an ally nation of Kalinga, and Singhala had a safe haven for Buddha scriptures and relics and everything. Strong Bodha hold Singhala was. So Princess Hemamala and Danta, they carried this to Singhala and entrusted it to the then king of Singhala, who enshrined it in a temple in Anuradhapura, and now it is at Kandy in the Temple of the Tooth. So even in Sri Lanka, the tooth relic that is worshipped is basically the one which was brought there by Princess Hemamala. And now also you see in Singhala lots of legends, movies, books, and everything talking about Hemamali's journey to Singhala. Even later years, there was another king called Nishanka Malla who talks about his Kalinga roots and his relations with Kalinga. Then we come to a very surprising for many of you, Maldives. Like it was a surprise for me as well when I found about it recently, few months ago, that Maldives about the first Hindu kingdom in Maldives, the Solar dynasty or the Aditya Vansa as they have recorded, was founded by somebody. This particular spelling that you see is how they have written it in Maldivian Divehi. So the first Hindu kingdom was founded by Suradarsuna Aditya, a prince of Kalinga. Even the last Hindu kingdom that was there before the Islamic kingdom of Maldives was because the princess Damahar, who was from the Solar dynasty, she married a prince of the Somavanshi lunar dynasty of Kalinga, Sripaladitya. So twice prince in two times in history, princes of Kalinga, like prince of Kalinga went and because of them there were like the Solar dynasty and the lunar dynasty, and it is recorded in their own history. Because of such relations with Kalinga, there was a regular exchange of spiritual and other cultural journeys which happened, which can still be seen in the Buddhist relics and remains and ruins across some of the islands in Maldives, and some sculptures and pictures and ruins. Now, one of the most important Kalinga connections is Java. In Javanese history, in ancient Javanese history, there are records which talk about Kalinga's connection with Java. Now, John Crawford, I have taken this quote from John Crawford's writings, who was who is still known to be one of the most eminent people who even Javanese, Malays, and other Southeast Asian people they revere and they look up to because of his mastery in all these ancient languages and preservation of their culture. So he has translated the ancient Javanese into English in the records. What says Kalinga is the only country of India known to the Javanese by its proper name. They always designate India by this name, Keling. It is to Kalinga that the Javanese universally ascribe the origin of their Hinduism. People of Kalinga played a significant role in the evolution of Saivism in Indonesia. Now, this phrase is from Borobudur. It shows the court of the Shailendra king. Now, some historians have recorded that the Shailendras of Java were an offshoot of the Shailodbhavas, who one of its branches went to Java. Shalodbhavas were one of the most eminent Shiva worshipping dynasties of Odisha. Still now, you find the Parasurameshwara temple in Bhubaneswar, which is a still used temple, like it's still worshipped in the temple. There is worship happening in the temple even now. So, very ancient temple dedicated to Shiva by the Shalodbhavas. Their offshoot, the Sailendra dynasty of Java, is connected. Then, if you go to Cambodia, which was called as Funan by the Chinese and even Cambodia by the Indians, in Cambodian legends, in their history, they talk about the first proper dynasty, which was a mixed dynasty, which happened because a Naga princess of Cambodia, her name was Princess Soma. She married, or there was a union between the Princess Soma of the Nagas of Cambodia, ancient Cambodia, with a Brahmin named Kaundinya who came from the eastern seaboard of India. Now, if you see Kaundinya Gotri people are one of the most ancient Brahmin group of people who inhabit even now in Odisha. And many of their roots and lineage lie across the Mahindra Parvat, Mahindragiri region of undivided Ganjam, that is today Gajapati. And in Mahindragiri, on the top, there is a shrine for Shiva. And when the Kaundinya went with his group and he married Princess Soma, after that, whatever developments that happened in Cambodia, the Shiva temples and other things which happened, there were two mentions of Mahindra Parvat. Like there were two areas where they had mentions of Mahindra Parvat. They named it after Mahindra Parvat region, and also there was a Shiva temple on top. So Kaundinya Brahmin from Kalinga marrying Soma. That is in their legends. Now to China. And this particular record is from ancient Tang courts of China, that Subhakara Simha, he is very, very revered in China even now. Subhakara Simha went from the royal house of the Bhaumakaras, the Bhaumakara dynasty of Orissa, who were there, who ruled between 8th and 10th century. And also a scholar, Bauddha scholar called Pragya. He was a monk scholar based at Pushpagiri Vihara. They went to the Tang court. They were sent by the Bhaumakara kings to the Tang court in China. And when they went there, they carried invaluable Buddhist texts. When they went to China, they stayed there for a few years and they translated a lot of Sanskrit texts into Chinese. After learning Chinese, they translated a lot of such suttas and texts into Chinese. And their work is still now considered very invaluable by the Chinese because they were like pretty significant works in Vajrayana Buddhism that they translated. Coming to the last one, where we see the Odisha connection, and these all are socio-cultural connections we are talking about. Like where there are imprints and there's some legacies that is mentioned in the histories and records of these places. So Tibet and Himalayan kingdoms, that is another significant thing I realized, how what is the connection that they have mentioned about Odisha. So Mahasiddha Indrabhuti and Padmasambhava, they are revered in Himalayan kingdom, the Vajrayana Buddhism, that is Tibetan Buddhism, that is followed. And the ancient Tibetan texts mention many Siddhas and Mahasiddhas who hail from Sambhala region in Odiyana. Sambhala is nothing but the modern day Sambalpur region, and Odiyana is how Odisha used to be mentioned in Buddhist texts. So Mahasiddha Indrabhuti, his sister Mahasiddha Lakshminkara, they were founders of Vajrayana and Sahajayana branches of Tantric Buddhism. And Guru Padmasambhava, or Rinpoche as they call in Tibetan, he was the adopted son of Indrabhuti, who went to Tibet, and he's considered one of the biggest gurus of Tibet. Yesterday, I think, was the Hermes festival, which is celebrated in the honor of Padmasambhava. Other Mahasiddhas like Sarahapa, Kambalapa, Luipa, Kanhupa, Pitopa, Lalita Vajra, they were all from the Odisha region. And we can still see the names. Suppose Luipa, this name you can still see in today's Odisha in some of the regions as Luipa College or Luipa this, that. And Sarahapa's poetry in that ancient Odia, the poetry that he has written, the Charjapada, those common Odia words are still used in the rural parts of Odisha even now. So that Odia, the poetry or the works from Sarahap and other Charjapada writers are still understood because they were colloquial Odia. let's go to like we talked about all these socio-cultural impact, the imprints that other histories talk about Odisha. Before me showing you a reflection of a shared maritime heritage, like actual right now what we see, the imprints that are left after all these centuries. Before that, I would just like to mention that the other part of the Indian Ocean, that is Rome, let's say ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, or Greece or Persia, all these places also mention of Orissa, but more of a social cultural impact was on this side, on Southeast Asian side, and more of trade and commodity related relations with the Western side. Now let's examine the reflections that we see even now because of the shared heritage, maritime heritage that Odisha shares with other parts of the Southeast Asia. Now, these two pictures are pictures of filigree crafts. The right side is a filigree brooch, as it says, handcrafted Indonesia. Left side is another filigree brooch. Now, here is a little interesting story. It's a personal story. This actually started my journey a few years ago into trying to find out, more about the history of my heritage. When in the United States, I was visiting a local shop which sells all the crafts from different parts of the world. I chanced upon this little brooch, which I had not seen that it was written in Indonesia. But when I saw it, I was like, wow, they are selling something from Odisha's silver filigree tarakasi. But when I saw that it was handcrafted in Indonesia, I thought it might be a spelling mistake or something. But talking to the store manager, I found out that no, that was in fact from Indonesia. So when I Googled and found that indeed there was a filigree craft, a traditional filigree craft in Indonesia, which bears striking resemblance to patterns, designs, like exact similar designs in Kendari. That was called Kendari. In Indonesia, the silver filigree is called Kendari. In Odisha, it is called Tarakasi. In Cuttack, Tarakasi work is famous during Durga Puja and all the pandals, the Durga's, the ornaments are all silver filigree and gold filigree Tarakasi. So it was a big revelation for me. I was like, see, there is a similar craft on the other side of Indian Ocean. And we, in Odisha, we don't even know about Kendari. I spoke to some Indonesian friends. They didn't know anything about Tarakasi. So parallelly, there are two similar crafts which are existing, but no one knows about the other. And these have both have centuries old heritage. So that clearly shows a shared maritime heritage. Who influenced who, we don't know, but for sure there is a shared maritime heritage. Second one, a very striking thing again, which shows shared maritime heritage, are the Bandha from Odisha and the Ikat from Indonesia and other regions, the traditional weaves. So if you see in Southeast Asia, you see Indonesian ikats, Burmese ikats, Vietnamese, Cambodia, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Laos, name it. Everywhere there is ikat patterns and designs which are traditional. When I in fact was searching, when I saw these Philippines and Laos ones, I was like totally at a double take because we had exact similar type of bedspreads and curtains and other fabrics growing up in Odisha, the similar patterns. And some of the Indonesian patterns I found on Google, the type of motifs that were used are still used in Khandwa and even the Sambalpuri ikats. So that was like, we always know that of course Ikat has had a great journey through the Silk Route and other shared heritages, but seeing all these similar patterns was another revelation. So the here I have shown you the ikats from India, the Odisha's Bandha Bomkai from the western regions of Barpali, Bargarh, Sambarpur, and all, and Sonpur. Then Nabakoti Khandua. This has a heritage of centuries and centuries. Khanduas from right now you find more in Maniabandha area. Then the Sambalpuri, Pochampalli from Andhra, and Patan Patola from Gujarat. So if you see the Ikat regions of India, this is a map from before when undivided Andhra and Odisha. So if you see the cluster of Ikat, we find it very surprisingly the cluster is only on this particular coastal belt, which is just right above the Coromandel coast. Like this side is Konkan coast, this is Malabar coast, this is Coromandel coast, right? So this coast must have been the Kalinga coast. So this cluster here you see is more in the ancient Kalinga coast. And of course, a little cluster in Gujarat because Gujarat also had traders who, later on had trade relations with Southeast Asia and everywhere. So, ICAT's maritime shared heritage, it's quite evident that who influenced who? That is a big question. We don't know. Maybe both, it was a both way journey. Here, the next one, which gives a strong, very strong imprint of a shared heritage, is boats and lamp festivals all across Southeast Asia. A little while ago, I was talking about Kalinga Sadhavas and how we still remember in Odisha, every year we have a festival to commemorate the Kalinga Sadhavas journey. So the Kartika Purnima Danga Bhasa means floating the boat. Kartika Purnima is the full moon day of the lunar month of Kartika. So it is called Kartika Purnima Danga Bhasa. It is also called Boita Bandhana, that means doing bandapana for the boat or the ship, and Bali Jatra, a yatra to Bali, the voyage to Bali. So either like Danga Bhasa, Boita Bandhana, Bali Jatra, it is celebrated every year with a lot of guts. So, like even people who live outside Odisha, like me, if we don't have like, okay, let me tell you first what happens in Kartik Purnima Dangavasa. On that day, early in the morning, people take little boats made up of plantain stems or cork sole, and they would put little lamps, flowers, other offerings, then betel nuts, and they will float it in the nearby water body like the sea or the river or a pond or a lake or anything, any water body. And while doing that, we say a certain few lines with Akama, Boy Panagu Athwe. These festival, it's not a religious festival per se, but it's more of a traditional festival in which we commemorate the voyage of the sadhavas to Bali and other regions. This was the time when the sadhavas set their sails to go towards Southeast Asia. They knew that the wind and the currents was in favor to for this onward journey. After 10 months, they used to return with the returning winds and the currents, which was during the month of Bhadravashvina. So, this particular festival is still observed by Odiyas all across the globe. Like, for example, here I don't have a river or lake nearby me. So, for Kartik Purnima, we make a little board and float it in a bucket of water or the bathtub or something because it's just a symbolic remembrance of this tradition that has happened for centuries. So this particular festival is very very similar. At the same time, we find festival in Thailand called as Lao Krathong, the same time of the year, the lunar month, full moon, what is Kartika Purnima in India. In Thailand, they have Lao Krathong, similar type of ritual with floating a little boat with lamps and other offerings. In Laos, they have Bon La Hufai. In Myanmar, they have Thandin Gyot. In Bali, and another festival also. They have in Bali, they used to have a Masakapam Kepesi, which was again commemorating the similar events, and in Cambodia, Bonam Tuk and Bonded Pratik. Now, all these festivals across Southeast Asia bear a resemblance to only, like in India, out of all the coasts of India, only Odisha celebrates this particular lamp and boat festival, just like the other places. In the other places, they identify this more with their Buddhist heritage. But in Odisha, like it has become of a Buddhist heritage. Initially in Bali, they used to celebrate it to commemorate their parent home, like of Kalinga. But slowly it became more intertwined with their Buddhist heritage. But the significant thing is, at the same time of the year, the similar rituals, and out of all these places, it has resemblance only to in Odisha, we still celebrate at the same time. So that is the shared maritime heritage, I feel. Third one, let's look at an example of similarities in bridge architecture, ancient bridges, not today's bridges or the arched bridges of modern day, but ancient bridges which have been told by an big name in Odisha's history, like we revere him, like Andrew Stirling. His books about his records about Odisha when are like very factual, like description, factual in the sense description of the sizes, shapes, and how they found different monuments and things in Odisha. So from his works, I have taken his description about the Otharanala Bridge of Puri, which is from the 13th century, Bhanudeva's time, but it was actually built a little before, and this was the time when it was maintained. He writes about Atharnala as being made of horizontal tiers of stones and they were projecting slightly. So these were not like the arch bridges that you find in Roman architecture or later Islamic architecture. So what he has written about Otharanala, which is still standing, like it's a still living bridge, like a still surviving bridge, I mean, in Puri, we find the exact type of bridge in Cambodia, the Spain Praptos bridge, which is also the similar Hindu architecture, and that was from 12th century from King Jayavarman's time. We saw bridge architecture being similar. Now let's see some similarities in temple sculptures. So if you see the Makara figures from Odisha and Cambodia, the Kirtimukha figures from Odisha, Cambodia, Gajalakshmi figures, just simple trellises and sculptural motifs. Even in Javanese temples, Hindu temples, you find a lot of, even the Buddhist Javanese temples, there are a lot of similarities with Odissan architecture and sculptures. Now, to something more intangible. We saw so many tangible proofs there, but now let's see something intangible in words and linguistics. This is also something of a cultural continuity that happens. And words and linguistics, especially what I personally feel, words and linguistics bear a lot of secrets to our previous ancestors, because the words that we speak as common people, the common colloquial languages, carry on more steadfastly than classical literature and stuff, because these are the words that we use more of in day to day life. Now let's take few examples across different cultures and Odisha. The first one I found, which was very striking and significant for me, was Bappa. We in Odisha we call our father Bappa. It's a very common form of address for a father. So Bappa is also used as a form of address for one's father in different Indonesian languages like Banjarese, Blagar, Balinese, and other Indonesian. Even in Philippines, there is a language Ilocano they call Bappa. In Malay, there is address for father as Bappa. Also in Odisha, we have other forms of address for father like Nonna and Baba, but this was one of the most common forms of address. Then in Odia and in Maori language of the indigenous people of New Zealand, they they have a very unique word topoi, which in Odisha we have a word topoi. Topoi is the name of in Odia. It is the name of a protagonist of a damsel of a girl who belonged to the Kalinga Sadhava family, and her father and her brothers were Kalinga Sadhava merchants who went to faraway Bali, Java, Sumatra for trade. And Toppoi's story is still celebrated as a vrat every Bhadrav during the time when the Sadhavas used to come back from the return journey. So still now the Toppoi tale is like relieved every year in the coastal belts of Odisha. And this Toppoi word is not that much in use now as a name, like it's a more of an antique name and very significant name. So what happened is once I thought like if I search Topoi on Google, it should only give me only as like Odisha as this story. So I just tried this experiment. When I Googled it, Lo and behold, the first thing that came to me in the Google search was Topo is a Maori word which means to travel. So that was so surprising for me, like far away, completely disparate culture, and they have the same word and which means to travel. And here, Topoi's father and brothers used to travel to all these islands which were very close to Polynesia. Polynesia is where Maoris came from. So something very significant that I found. Then in Divehi language of Maldives, Ga. Ga is a word which is a name for one of the islands in the Adu Atoll, and in their language, they think that it is derived from one Indian word like gram, which means village. So gram, everyone knows that it's a Sanskrit word for village, but in Odisha, in rural Odisha, or in our colloquial talks, like at home with the talk that we do common Odia, Ga is nothing but village. Grammar is the better Odia or the literature Odia or Sanskrit based Odia, but Ga is the colloquial word for village. And similar word is the name in Divehi for the island, which means village. In Sinhalese and in Odia, I found like this words, like there are so many other words in all these, but I'm just taking one word each here. So in Sinhalese, they call Lunu Marish, and in Odia, we call Luna Maricha. Luna Maricha is nothing but a condiment that is used as an accompaniment while serving rice, dal, and other things. We will put a little salt and a chili pepper. Even the Sinhalese people, they make a condiment out of chili pepper, salt, and other things, which they call lunumarish. Now, another shared heritage that I found, which is still surviving, is the art of tattooing, the body art. The tattooing art called Chitta Kutteva in Odisha's rural communities still we find, and in among the indigenous tribals in Odisha. Actually, I remember my grandmom and in her generation, most of the ladies of my grandmom's times used to have such tattooing on their arms and on their ankles, on their neck or face. So this was very common in Odisha till few decades ago, and even now it survives in a lot of rural hinterlands of Odisha. And it used to be done by the females of the snake charmer community called as the Keluni, who went from home to home or in fairs, and the ladies of the house would do the tattooing with the god's name or husband's name or different motifs. But now there is a tribal group who live in Odisha called as Kutia Kondha. They still follow this to this date. Similarly, in Philippines, the Kalinga indigenous people, the tribals who belong to the Kalinga culture, they are famous world over for Kalinga tattoos. Now, here is one more thing. If you Google Kalinga word now, the first thing or the most number of search answers that you will find for Kalinga are the Kalinga tattoos or in relation to Philippines, not as Kalinga for Odisha. So that it is that famous world over as the Kalinga tattoos, and this is from that indigenous people who live in the Kalinga province in Philippines. We saw so many shared heritages, shared imprints and echoes that Odisha has left because of its maritime past. But now let me take you to because we are talking about a window to her heritage and legacies. It will we need to speak about the classicality of Odisha's language, Odia, its music and dance, and its people. So, has anyone mentioned about them? So let's see. Panini in his work Ashtadhyay, Panini is from 5th century before Christ. He refers to the Udras as the inhabitants of the Kalinga Janapada. Now, these Udras or Odras have eventually got to be known as the Odia people. Udra Vibhasa has been mentioned in Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra. Here, Udra Vibhasa, he has mentioned as spoken in Udra Desha, Kalinga region. And Udra Vibhasa constituted a lot of different languages, including Shabara language, Udra language, Dravida language, so many languages. So you can find in Bharata's Natya Shastra. And Odia language's classicality time and again has been reinforced by texts, epigraphic evidences, literature, and a continuity in time and geography. So both people's literature, common literature, as well as higher literature, everything you find and in continuation. Last but not the least in the classicality is the music and dance form of Odisha. Right now we know it as Odissi, Odissi dance and Odissi music, which is mentioned as Odra Magadhi as one of the four Natya Prabritis mentioned in Bharata Muni's Natya Shastra. Out of Avanti, Dakshinatya, Odra Magadhi, and Panchali. So and all this have more evidences and textual references talking about the classicality of the Odia people, Odia language, Odisha music and dance. The mystical land of Utkala. Utkala, as you all must have heard in our national anthem penned by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, Janagana Mana, as Dravida Utkala Banga. So, Utkala, the name Utkala comes from the land of Utkarshakala. Utkarshakala means the land of exquisite arts and artisans. So Odisha is the land where stones, textiles, colors, everything speak volumes and convey volumes. So be it the Pattachitra traditional paintings of Odisha, be it the filigree, be it the Chandua of Pipili, be it the sculptures written like their poetry in motion on the temple walls, be it the bandha textiles from Odisha, be it the dance, be it the jhoti, muruja, chitta, on the floor and the walls. So, be it all these things, Odisha is the land of exquisite arts and artisans. That's why it is called Utkala. And if we are speaking about Odisha, it will be incomplete if we speak about the unity in diversity that is exemplified in Odisha in its spiritual and religious context, and of course about Sri Jagannatha. Odisha is a home to various faiths like indigenous faiths, tribal faiths, Jainas, Buddhas, Shaktas, Shaivas, then Tantric sects, and even the Vaishnavas. Odisha has always given an ambient and conducive environment for such a diversity and vibrancy in faiths and beliefs. So people have had a cohesive relation with each other. The different faiths have coexisted cohesively and progressively. Different times, the rulers, the common people, the rich merchants, everyone has had their own contribution to such a beautiful environment that has led to such richness in its diversity. Odisha is also the cradle of Tantric Buddhism, that is Vajrayana and Sahajayana. And in all of this, Sri Jagannatha is the whole and the soul of Odisha. Sri Jagannatha is the glue that keeps Odisha, that has kept Odisha together through all these millennia until now. Through all these different clans and people and different events, Sri Jagannatha is the anchor that Odisha has always had, and hopefully it will always have till this world is there. Like he's the Lord of the universe, so he's the deity for all, of all, and by all. Now, when I say this Jagannath consciousness, the Jagannath culture is a culmination of all that has happened in Odisha spiritually and religiously. Why? Because the Jainas, they identify with Jagannath as their Kalinga Jina, the Kalinga Jina for which Samrat Kharavela launched his expedition on Magadha, who had snatched away our Kalinga Jina. The Bodhas identify with Jagannath because of the tooth relic, as we already discussed, which was a temple at Dantapuri. The Shaktas, the Shaivas, the Tantric sects, they also identify with Jagannath and treat Jagannath as the ultimate Bhairava, with Ma Bimala as the Bhairavi. And everyone knows the Vaishnava aspect of Jagannath, the form of Krishna and Vishnu with everyone knows about the story of Jagannath, how the Daru Devata, the Daru Brahma, and the form that is worshipped now. So the indigenous, even the indigenous people's Daru Devata, the log form, if you go to indigenous cultures around the world, most of the indigenous tribal cultures have depicted their gods in sort of logs or stones. So this Daru Brahma form from the indigenous belief is again Jagannath. The Shunya Brahma form, which is worshipped by the Shunya Sahi, when God is nothing and everything is nothing, nothing is everything. From the Shunya parampara, even in Vaishnava sect it's there. So Shunya Brahma is Jagannath. So Jagannath is the culmination of anything, everything, and what has happened through the centuries and millennia in Orissa. Recently, there was the festival of Rath Jatra is happening in Puri. The Gundicha Jatra has finished few days ago, and the Bahuda Jatra, the returning of Jagannath back to his temple, will happen soon. So with this, I want to say an ode to my birthplace, few lines, an ode to Odisha. Odisha is verdant, sylvan, sublime. Odisha is spiritual, soulful, mystical. Odisha has unpretentious beauty in its simplicity. Odisha has exquisite art, craft, sculpture, architecture. Odisha's music, dance, language, literature is par excellence. Odisha has centuries of glorious heritage and enriched culture. Odisha is the place where the deities are the soul and the heartbeat of the people. And Odisha is the place where the rulers have always ruled as the representatives of their deity and not as the supreme king of the land. So, from Odisha, I extend all of you a welcome and an invitation to explore my this beautiful state steeped in culture and heritage. I invite you personally to explore this place either physically or via by reading more about it, or trying to learn a little more, whatever is your line of interest, be it tourism, be it spiritualism, be it history, architecture, textiles, dance, music. But I invite you to explore Odisha in all its glories. And I thank you all for listening patiently to my presentation today. It was an absolute honor and privilege to present about my home state. And thanks to you all. Thanks to Sangam Talks. Thank you, Tania. And Jai Jagannath. Namaskar.
Hi, namaskar, Prita. Very good morning, and thank you for collecting and doing this for us. It is eye-opening to know so many things about Odisha, and thank you, Sangam Tak, for doing this. Prita, I actually don't have much to ask you, but was curious to know the facts that you collected and references that you took. If any link you can give us, or whatever your research, those will be helpful to somebody to go through and try to do some digging by themselves. That doesn't mean that your recordings are there. It'll be good reference to, and to talk about that with our kids. I'm glad that it was recorded, but references, some reference if you can give also, that would be helpful as well, whatever you did the research.
Yeah, thank you, Sachi, for the question. I have put an email here. So can you please send me an email, and I could send you like any papers or anything or books that you would be interested in, whatever field that you're interested in about Odisha's heritage. I could send it across via email. And the email is written, it's right here on the screen. It's Global Odia with two A's, the last GLOBALODIAA @gmail.com. But thank you for all the kind words.